And let's return to our top story. Google is facing a new threat to Android's dominance of the smartphone market. A record $5 billion fine from the EU for forcing smartphone makers to install Google apps on Android devices. 80% of all smartphones run on Google's Android systems. Competitors claim it's using that dominance to monopolize the marketplace. FairSearch, who brought the antitrust suit against Google, represents companies like Oracle, Nokia, and Microsoft, who once held the record for the biggest antitrust fine from Europe. I'm joined now by Thomas Vine, the counsel at FairSearch. He's live via Skype from Honolulu, Hawaii. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, give me some idea as to why you think this case is a solid one.
Well, Google has imposed its applications and its version of the Android operating system on smartphone producers and thereby on consumers. And this decision should enable competition in that market. And our view is competition is good for consumers.
And you, as we mentioned in your intro, represented some of the other major competitors of Google's, also the subject of lawsuits from the EU. Why should viewers think that you are looking out for the consumer's well-being and not the other big companies who also went through a similar lawsuit?
Well, I do represent companies, both large and small. I would not wish to hide that at all. But that does not mean that the theories that my clients have pursued are not in the interest of consumers. And the European Commission will pursue cases only if it concludes that consumers are harmed. So it's really finally up to the Commission to decide whether the case is solid and whether they need to decide the case the way they did in order to benefit consumers.
And as we know from the stock price reaction, there wasn't much of a reaction from Google shareholders. Google said that they would, of course, appeal this ruling. What does that suggest to you? How long of a battle will this be?
Well, Google has said it will appeal. The appeal process, if they take it to the end, will take several years. However, they will be required, unless they receive so-called interim measures, to implement the decision within 90 days. So we hope that in a relatively short term, there will be some effects in the market.
And this comes at a time when there's so much uncertainty throughout Europe, whether it's Brexit negotiations, whether it's trade tariffs with the United States. Is this the time for even your clients now to be facing an additional burden with this lawsuit like the one that we're seeing in the size and magnitude?
I don't believe that any company other than Google faces a burden by virtue of this decision. And frankly, the burden that Google faces is one that it should have faced up to long ago, and which in fact should never have existed.
Why do you think there's such a difference as far as regulations from the EU and the United States when it comes to tech companies? From the U.S.'s perspective, they do seem to be, even though they've become a little more aggressive following the 2016 election, for the most part, they seem to be more hands-off. We don't see the same in Europe. Why do you think we have these two differing oversights from the regulators?
That's a very good question. I think there is a lot of misperception out there in that regard. First, one needs to have a historical perspective. And the truth is that European Union law on dominant companies' behavior has very long been more robust than U.S. law. Now, one can have debates about whether that's a good or a bad thing, but it has been that way for a long time. And secondly, it's not accurate to accuse the Commission of targeting U.S. tech companies, because in fact, in areas where European companies are dominant, such as in European energy markets, financial services markets, the European Commission is equally robust in its enforcement with respect to those dominant companies.